How much money do you need to make in order to achieve long-term happiness for yourself, and in order to feel like you have plenty of money and live rich, or at least live well or live wealthy, or whatever people call it, or whatever that means for you? I will analyze that today based on my past experience of going through several income levels, and maybe this will help you formulate some goals for yourself. By the end of this video, you'll have a more thorough understanding of this. I am Caleb Jones, and this is Sovereign CEO. I help people just like you how to set up location-independent businesses, move to a less bad country, or at least set up an international backup plan, and do all those things for very little money. And a core part of that, the baseline foundation of that, is location-independent income. And so what I'm going to talk about here is levels of income. I'm not going to address whether or not it's location-dependent or not. That should be a no-brainer for you. If you're watching this channel, if you're watching this content, you should not consider any income as valid unless it is 100% location independent. As I've talked about many times, we've just entered into a political and economic and cultural dark age. People who do not have location independent income, unless they are already very wealthy, are going to be in very, very big trouble. Matter of fact, I would argue they already are, so I'm not going to cover that particular aspect today. Instead, what I'm going to cover is specific income levels, and I have gone through most of these levels and go through what these levels mean in terms of your lifestyle and in terms of your overall level of happiness. Cool. Now, before I get into these, I gotta cover a few bases. I'm gonna use American dollars, okay? So if you're outside the United States, please feel free to convert to your own currency. I'm gonna use USD, number one. Number two, every time I talk about this stuff, if I say you need at least $85,000 a year for long-term happiness, people in the comments always say, well, wait a minute, that's if you live in this country or this city. If you live in this country or that city, you don't need anywhere near that. Yes, that is correct. So I'm just going to cover across the board in terms of the Western world in a major typical Western city. I am not talking about people who live in Chiang Mai. I'm not talking about people who live in Paraguay. I'm not talking about the low-end stuff. I'm talking about the Western world in a relatively normal, typical sized city, okay? Yes, you can obviously have a higher level of lifestyle by moving to a less expensive country. I've talked about that in great detail in my content. That's one of the many reasons you should leave the collapsing West, to save money on either living expenses, or in my case, when I moved here to Dubai, taxes. Or in some cases, you could do both. Why not? So I'm not going to cover, again, that aspect today. You could nitpick these numbers, especially the lower numbers, based on where you physically live. I'm using that as a baseline example. Cool. Okay. First, let's talk about people who make between $0 and about, I would say, $40,000 a year, 40K. I call these people poor. This means you can't really even afford to live on your own. You probably have roommates. You are constantly worried about money. You're complaining about money. Money is a problem for you. It's very unlikely you live alone. You probably live with mommy and daddy or roommates. You may not even own a car. If you own a car, it's a piece of shit. This is a very low level of lifestyle, again, in the Western world in a typical city. And yes, you could certainly move to, rural Thailand or something like that and do okay if you're making $30,000, $40,000 a year, provided it's location dependent. We're not going to discuss that in this particular video, but you're right about that. The next income bracket are people from, let's say, 41K to just under the Sovereign CEO minimum, which would be $85,000 a year. So this would be $84K per year. These people I call fucked. You know why? Because they're fucked. Grant Cardone's talked about this. I'm not the only person who's talked about this. Robert Kiyosaki's talked about this. These are middle class people. The middle class, if you're in the middle class, you're fucked. Especially if this is not location independent. You can make arguments if it's location independent, you don't live in the United States, you don't live in the Western world. Yes. But if you are the typical person making this kind of money, boy, you're in big trouble. You probably have a bunch of debt, you have a bunch of expenses, you're probably strapped every month. Again, you're complaining about money every month. Matter of fact, in my experience, I have found that people who are fucked tend to complain about money more than people who are poor. People who are poor, this is just my anecdotal experience, kind of don't mind it. I don't really understand this because I've been poor and I hated it, but I know a lot of people and knew a lot of people throughout my life who they're poor and they just kind of don't give a shit. Like, yeah, I'm poor, it sucks, and oh well, that's just the way it goes. Shit. Whereas people who are more middle class, who I call fucked, they're bitching about money all the fucking time because they're working hard and making no money. A lot of these people aren't even working. Matter of fact, as people like Dennis Miller have pointed out, you can, if you are patient enough to make a lot of phone calls and file a lot of paperwork, in many countries, the United States included, you can, just through government assistance alone, make up to the equivalent of about $40,000 a year by not working. When you have food stamps, welfare, subsidized housing, things like that. Matter of fact, I have personally known people who had no job and no income, but they had a decent, nice apartment. Their kids, if they had them, had an Xbox. They had a big, giant TV. They had a food full refrigerator. They had air conditioning. They didn't own a car, but they were fine. They lived a lifestyle of around $40,000 a year without even working. Yeah, it's pretty bad. I wonder why the Western world's collapsing. I wonder why. I wonder why that's happening. So you get my point. So then we have one of the magical levels, in my opinion, which is $85,000 a year. And that is the sovereign CEO minimum for long-term consistent happiness. I have talked about this in my books. I've talked about this in my other content. I'm not going to go to detail about this. They have done many research studies, surveys, scientific studies on what makes people happy. And they have found repeatedly, if you make around $85,000 a year, that you are at peak happiness levels in terms of not going beyond $85,000 and getting diminishing returns. In other words, if you make less than $85,000 a year, you will be happier if you make more money. The old adage of money doesn't make you happy is scientifically and empirically inaccurate. If you make less than $85,000 a year, I promise you, you will be happier if you make more money, certainly if you hit to the $85,000 a year level. Now, if you make more than $85,000, you might be happier, you might not, depends on your personality and many other factors. But that's why I talk about this as the sovereign CEO minimum of long-term consistent happiness in your life. If you don't have a financial income goal, and you should, but if you don't and you have no idea what it should be, this should be it. $85,000 a year should be your goal. So the next income level after this are people who make, let's say, $86K to $119K, again in US dollars. And I call these people okay. You're okay. You make this kind of money, you're not rich, you're still middle class, and that's literal, by the way. If you don't believe me, six-figure income, I've talked about this before. When I was a kid in the 80s, and maybe, when I was a young man in the early 90s, if you made $100,000 a year, you were like rolling in cash. You were like rich. It was great. Today, $100,000 a year, US, in the typical Western environment, is middle class. So these people are upper middle class. So you're okay. You're not good. You're nowhere near great, but you're okay. You're fine. You're not poor. You're not fucked. Now, you could be fucked. There are some people in this category who are fucked. You can say, well, Caleb, what if you make $105,000 a year and you got 4 kids and you live in New York City? Well, yeah, then you're fucked. But that's kind of an extreme example. If you make $105,000 a year and you have 5 kids, you're probably not living in New York. You're probably living in North Dakota or whatever. I'm exaggerating. You get my point. Now, I just realized I made a mistake. I'm not sure if I verbally said it in this video. You can rewind and see. This 2 should be a 9. So 119K. I think that's right. So yes, 86 to 119K, you're okay. That brings us to our next magical level of $120,000 a year. This is a special level. I've experienced this myself. This means you're making $10,000 a month. And something magical occurs. I've talked about this in my coaching program. Something magical in your brain occurs when you start making $10,000 a month. When you start making $10,000 a month, all of a sudden your brain says, hey, I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at making money. This is real money. And by the way, that is real money. You make $10,000 a month, that's real money. Unlike these other levels, $10,000 a month, not bad. And you start thinking, well, gosh, if I can make $10,000 a month, why couldn't I make more? What if I wanted to make this or that or this? Or what are the things I can now do with my life now that I know for a fact I can make the real money? And this is a mental shift that doesn't occur in my experience, both my personal experience and people I've worked with have known. It doesn't happen until you hit this level right here. It doesn't happen when you hit 6 figures. I've mentioned this before. I made a 6-figure income, $100,000 a year, when I was 27 years old in the 90s, a long time ago, 1990 stars. So it was good money back then. But the second part of that story is that I languished at the $100,000 a year level for many years. I would make $102,000, $105,000, $97,000, $98,000, $104,000. I kind of languished at the 100 right about here for years and years and years because I never got to the $10,000 a year level. Once I got to the $10,000 a year income level, my income took off. It just hockey sticked because I went, whoa, hey, I'm pretty good at this. It didn't happen until I made $10,000 a month though. And I've seen this exact same thing happen to other guys, either before me or since me. So that's the next income level. That would be $121,000 to approximately $239,000. And I will call this level decent. You can't read that, but that says decent. That's decent. You're making decent money. If you stay out of debt, you're doing pretty well. This is where your lifestyle starts to reflect your income. You can make $100,000 a year and still live in a normal shitty house and drive a shitty car. I certainly did for a long time. Matter of fact, I was at this level for a long time. And if you guys know my story, I lived in a crappy little house where the yard was 3 feet tall, the grass was because I didn't want to bother mowing it. My next door neighbors was a house full of like 30 Mexicans. I lived on a crappy lower middle class street. My lifestyle didn't really reflect my income until I got to the higher income levels. But at least here you're doing decent. You're doing better than okay. You're still not great. It's not great. Okay, it's not. You've destroyed the value of the US dollar by voting for the lesser of two evils for 35 years straight. So even at this level, you're not rich, but you're decent. You're doing okay. At this point, you can start actually improving your lifestyle in really valid ways. Now, certainly, it would depend on your family situation and other factors. A single guy with no girlfriend and no wife and no kids and no debts is going to do pretty well down here. Whereas a guy who has a wife and maybe 2 or 3 kids, or a single guy with a lot of debt, things like that, or who travels a lot, is going to do less well, obviously. We're not accounting for lifestyle factors here. I'm just covering the generalities of income levels. Now we get into the big numbers, okay? So I'm going to cover now the areas in which you are starting to get rich, or at least you feel rich, if that makes sense. So first we're going to start out at another, in my opinion, magical level. That is $240,000 a year, okay? When you hit $240,000 a year, you really start to feel rich. At this level, you're making $20,000 a month. Okay, you're making $20,000 a month, even if it's pre-tax. And again, we haven't addressed taxes here, so that's another big complicated conversation. I'm assuming you're not getting absolutely raped in your taxes, and hopefully if you're self-employed, you're not paying too high taxes. Certainly if you're following the Alpha 2 business model, you're paying very low taxes here. But this is where you're making $20,000 a month. I promise you, when you start making $20,000 a month, you're gonna start feeling rich. This is where most people start to feel rich. Now you can get pretty much a big house, you can drive the nice car, you can travel wherever you want, you can buy first class tickets, you can stop worrying about how much things cost. Now I still, when I was at this level, still worried about how much things cost, but for the first time in my life, when I hit this level, I started to feel wealthy and feel like, okay, I'm a bigwig, I'm cool, this is not bad, I'm feeling good about my finances here, and I grew up poor, so it's harder for me. I have a lot of baggage from my subconscious from when I was a kid, but that's my own personal burden to bear. We all have our own burdens, and there'll be things that will assist you in terms of creating more money and things that will hinder you in terms of creating money for yourself based on your childhood experiences. Topic for another time. But at this level, you are now in the upper class. You've actually broken through. You're in the lower upper class, but you're in the upper class. So you're making this kind of money. You are. And that's just the way it goes. So from that point forward, you're getting into the big dollars. So the next level would be $241K to about, this is a rough estimate, about $450K a year. Okay, this is per year. Again, this is dollars. Got to put a K in there. I would call this low rich. I would call this starter rich. Okay? And I should say this really quick. This is all my opinion based on my subjective opinions of what I've experienced myself and what I've seen other people do. I am sure that everyone's going to have different numbers for their opinions on what these levels are. This is just my opinion based on what I've seen, but I have a lot of anecdotal experience in this area, and I've gone through all these levels myself, so I can kind of relate to this. But when you're making $240,000 to $450,000 a year, you stop caring about how much things cost. So that's the first thing that happens. You just stop giving a shit. I've mentioned this before. I think I mentioned this in one of my coaching programs. I don't think I mentioned this publicly. Late last year, Pink Firefly and I were in Dubai, and so we went to the Burj Khalifa, which is right over there, tallest building in the world. We went to the very top of the building and we had dinner. And it was kind of expensive. You go to the tallest building in the world, the top of the tallest building in the world, they're gonna charge you a lot of money. And she also drank some alcohol, that's even more money. We had appetizers, we had desserts. And at the end, the bill came, and adjusted for American dollars, the bill for the evening for 2 people was about $320 for dinner, okay? And I noticed, for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I just didn't care. Now, there are other things I haven't cared about in terms of how much things cost for many years now, but this was the first time that a restaurant bill didn't bother me in terms of how much money it was. I remember just a few years ago, certainly in my first marriage, but even just a few years ago, where if I went out to a restaurant and the bill was like $75, I would go, oh, I feel that in my body. Oh, $75. Oh, that's so much money. Fuck. I remember feeling that way. When you're at this level or above this level, you don't feel that way anymore. You don't really care about how much things cost. If you're doing sugar daddy game, you start becoming a little lackadaisical about negotiating shit. You start becoming, frankly, lackadaisical about negotiating a lot of shit. At least that's been my experience. You don't care how much things cost because you got plenty of goddamn money at this level. Again, assuming other factors. You're not living high on the hog. You're not having a lot of debt. You're not being stupid with your money. You're not making it rain on girls to club. Crap like that. So the next income bracket, in my opinion, is 451K. That's a 1 in there. Let me actually erase that. Hang on. This is a learned skill drawing one of these fucking things. 451K to about 800K per year. And this is what I would call good. Now we're good. You make it this level, assuming you're not stupid with your money, now we're good. Some people think that $100,000 a year is good, or $200,000 a year is good. Oh, not anymore. In the 80s, 90s, yes. Today, no. Hyperinflation, inflation, currency devaluation, Western collapse, sorry, no. You got to get to this level to get good. And so at this point, you're doing well, everything is fine, and you start looking at much bigger numbers. Matter of fact, I have noticed, I saw this in myself, and I've also seen this in other people, when they hit this level, they start looking at the big numbers. They start looking at, okay, well, what if I made $1 million a year? What if I made $3 million? What if I made $5 million a year? They start looking at things like buying a boat and buying mansions and crap like that. Now, I don't do that, but most people do at this level. It starts opening shit up. A word of warning, when you start hitting these levels and you have a serious girlfriend or wife, she's gonna start drooling. You're gonna see drool come out of her mouth. She's gonna like stare at your wallet, go, oh. Howard Stern has old jokes about in his first marriage where he had this hot girl come in once. I remember this was on a video. This is years ago. And this hot woman come in and she was totally in love with Howard Stern. And she would stare at him like this and just smile at him like this and talk to him. And he goes, wow, that's how my wife looks at my wallet. So just be very aware, even if your wife is a sweetheart and wonderful and honorable, women are designed a certain way, just be aware of this. This is also, by the way, the level at which you will suddenly get new friends and family members will start, if they find out you're making this kind of money, will start calling you. People are gonna start bugging you for money, bugging you for loans, shit like that. Be ready for that because that shit happens. Now, if you're a hardcore asshole like me, who is a robot, you'll have no problem telling these people to go fuck themselves. It's very easy. But if you're a nice guy, because I've seen a lot of guys at this level who are nice guys, and they help out women, these single guys, or they help out their sister or their brother, or they help out their stupid friend, or they help out their loser uncle. God forbid they help out their parents, their loser parents or angry parents who fucked them up. Be very, very careful about that at these levels. So the next level beyond that would be 801K to 1 million. And I think at 1 million, this is another kind of magical level, $1 million per year income. That is what, $87,000 a month, if my math is correct? That is another barrier you break through. When you start making $1 million a year, especially the first time it happens, you go, holy shit, I'm a badass. And something interesting happens when you hit that level. I'm not saying I've hit that level. I'm not saying anything. Remember, I've never talked about how much money I make. So I'm not saying a word. I'm just saying, hypothetically speaking, if you were to hit that level, what happens at that level is you start looking at guys who make a lot of money. You start looking at guys who make like 3 million a year, 10 million a year, 20 million a year, and you start feeling like a loser at the million mark. And that's just what happens. I've seen this happen to a lot of guys. They hit $1 million a year, they throw a little party for 10 seconds, and then they start talking to other guys who are making multiples of that, and they feel like a loser, and they start going, well, that sucks, I should make more. That is the danger of making more and more money. You have to get a number in your head. I've talked about this in my blogs. A number in your head where you will hit that number and then no longer worry about your income. You can increase your income over time if you want, but it's not a big goal anymore because you've hit your big number. I have a very specific number in terms of net worth, in terms of annual income, and in terms of residual after-tax monthly income, which I've talked about in a prior video. I have very specific numbers for these things. And as soon as I hit these numbers, I'm, quote, done worrying about money. Yes, I will continue to work. Retirement is stupid, but I will cut back and I will work for other reasons besides making a lot of money. Today, right now, I'm in it for the money. I've got a few more years of this phase of my life before I flip into phase 2 of my mission when I'm in my early 50s. I just turned 50. When I hit about 53, 54, that's when my next piece of life begins. But until then, I'm hitting to work hard because there's certain numbers I want to hit. And when I hit those numbers, I'm good to go. Yes, my income will probably still progress once I've hit these numbers, but it will not do so because I have set goals to do this. It'll just be a natural progression of me working. Now, I could keep going past $1 million. I think the next mark is about $3 million a year. And I think a mark beyond that would be about $10 million a year. These are numbers I definitely have not hit yet. So I'm really not going to go into detail about those, nor is that really relevant to most of you in my audience. The vast majority of you in my audience aren't anywhere on this sheet. You're on the prior sheet. Although I have worked with, and I know plenty of guys at these levels plus, especially as a consultant, I've worked with a lot of guys at these levels, and I could certainly talk about that. If that's a real big thing you want me to talk about in terms of the 3 million plus a year lifestyle, I can certainly talk about that in a future video. Certainly let me know. But I hope this has kind of helped in terms of structuring your own goals, in terms of making the money you want to make, and or the money maybe you don't want to make. Maybe some of you are like, I don't need to make anywhere near this shit. Caleb, if I make $120,000 a year with no debt, location independent, I'm good to go for the rest of my life because I'm moving to Cambodia or whatever. Great, that's fine. Your goal is yours. It's not mine. As long as you make the sovereign CEO minimum of $85,000 a year, location independent income through an Alpha 2.0 business you own and control, that goal or any goal beyond that is cool with me, bro. Whatever you want to do, it's your life. Cool? Cool. I will see you in the next video. Have fun. Bye.